Okay, this is a supplemental recording of the lectures I delivered on Wednesday, trying to recreate and maybe improve the efficiency of delivery. Let's see how we can do this. Okay. Lecture 10, Designing for Life. We start by reminding ourselves of the larger context. It's a beautiful day. The human species is at risk. The world, somewhere around 2040, will be turning to you for answers. Let's prepare to be in a position to deliver those answers. And just to extend this theme of setting the context, we remind ourselves that friends don't let friends allow their schooling to get in the way of their education. We're good at what we do at the school. We are the best there is. We're doing the best we can. But there's only so much we can do. It's not good enough. You are responsible for getting as much as you can out of school and then going beyond what the school is delivering to you, is presenting to you, and getting what you need to succeed. So just, it's useful to remind ourselves of that. And in that spirit, we start with target questions. We did this reading. That was interesting. There were certain takeaways that we extracted from the experience of actively reading this reading. Now we're in the habit of extracting the value as best we can out of each experience, including with the readings, and then we're evaluating where we're at. We then construct the target questions for the next thing we do. So we extract value out of the reading, and based on that new datum point, that new foundation of understanding that we generated from the reading, we look at what the burning questions are. What are the most burning questions? What do we need to get out of the next 2 hours during the lecture? And so we will be in the habit of doing that. When we fall out of the habit or in other classes, we strongly recommend that you continue this habit. Before you engage anything you do, the reading, the lecture, the analysis, the studio session, any meeting, any engagement, ask yourself, what do I want out of this? What are my burning questions that I need answers to? Some of the questions that were generated during the class meeting were, why Medellin? Why is Medellin so important to what we do? Another one is, where did Fajardo get the money to do these amazing library parks? Another one is not just about the content of what we're studying, but also at this point, it's still early in the semester, and you're being presented with a lot of challenging new approaches, new exercises, new assignments, new tools. So it's not unreasonable to have one of your target questions be about that. What are the expectations for this course? What are we expected to do? Why do the instructions keep changing? What's going on? Why can't we just have a solid set of instructions? And while we're at it, what about those grades? How come I only got 8 points out of 24? These are reasonable questions. One of the questions that came up, why backwards? Why are we starting? Why is the first week, week 11, and the next week is week 10? And then I have a question. I have a target question. I'm confessing here that the topic of this lecture, and to a large extent the topic of this course, is very much guided by the burning research questions that have driven my career, starting back when I was in school, when I was thrust into this strange environment, when I got a 3-month grant to live in Java, Indonesia, that thrust me into graduate school, that then sent me into teaching. And throughout it all, at every step, the question is the question of the course. How do we do a better job in the 21st century than we did in the 20th century? That's really the simplest form. I have, for better or worse, set up a series of challenges in my own life that have forced me to get out of my comfort zone, take my family to live in Medellin, Colombia, take my family to live in Indonesia, and next fall to take my family to live in Spain, and to engage Manuel Delgado in an ongoing conversation about the role of new approaches to architecture and urban form, especially as they manifest in the context of the severe challenges of Latin America. And through a series of meetings called Designing for Life in 2008, 2013, asking a series of questions that I often present tentative, speculative hypotheses in response to these questions. And we're going to do Designing for Life number 3 on October 7th, it looks like. Last Monday after class, we sat down and we figured out, we better do another one of these international symposia hosted at Wentworth. Let's get the funding and let's do it. If it does happen, I will be in the awkward position of presenting once again my latest thinking on the relationship between the problems of the 21st century, the role of architects in facing those problems effectively, and what we can learn from this body of evidence produced by the history of architectural engagement in Latin America around these ideas of designing for life. In order to prepare me for that challenge, I am setting you up not just as students who follow along in the shadow of this research, but as active participants in producing the understandings that are the research. You are my research collaborators. We are partners in answering the question, what does this architecture do in Latin America? How does it do it? Can it be characterized as mobilizing reflexive forces through architecture and urban form? So that's my target question. I want to help you get an understanding of these principles so that you can identify what they look like in practice, so you can produce the evidence through the analysis assignment that will help us understand, all of us understand, what architecture can do to address the most serious problems of the 21st century. And so I want to help you, help me, help you, help the world. So those are the target questions. The easiest one to respond to is why backwards? Given the seriousness of what it is we're trying to do here, the former practice of starting, I don't know, at Jericho, 9000 BC, or Çatal Höyük in Turkey, and looking at the early history of cities and moving up through time, and whoopsie-daisy, there were so many Monday holidays in the semester, that we only got up to the post-war period and we never really got to the present day. Sorry, what you're going to do, there's just no time to respond to anything. The other thing that happens when we start at the beginning of history is we notice that students get all relaxed and passive, and it's just entertaining to learn about these histories without really sensing much of a connection to our own lives and our own time spaces and our own careers. So given the outcomes of that approach in the 20th century, it's not unreasonable to reject it entirely and do the opposite. Whatever we did in the 20th century, let's do the opposite. In this case, it's not just a random contrarianism. It is for very good reasons that we are suspicious that starting at the dawn of time and moving up through history is not just less effective, it's actually counterproductive because it turns us into passive consumers of knowledge. Instead, we should be aggressive participants in the struggle, the collective struggle to figure this stuff out so we can do what is necessary to improve outcomes for ourselves, our generation, and the world. That's the professional obligations. This is a matter of professional ethics. So that's the question of backwards. In terms of clarity of the assignment, let's take a moment and look at some of these questions. We asked you to do in the rubric. We said don't do the video. It's not time yet. Don't do the caption. Don't bother with citation. Don't even do the provocative question at the end, and don't even do a claim. Just choose an image. Number one, select an image. Number two, analyze the image using these tools. Number three, do part of what the assignment describes in number three. Translate 5 aspects of what is revealed through the analysis of the visual evidence. Translate those insights as directly as possible into 5 sentences, and then stop. Submit that as a PDF. Don't write a claim. Don't write a provocative question. No caption, no citation necessary, no video. Okay. And so I don't know how you guys are doing this so well, but I've never seen a group so early in the semester really nail it in terms of selecting the image. So I'm not going to spend time on that. You guys get it. Architectural scale, human experience in the foreground in relation to the larger urban context in the background. You did it. Mostly. But number two, precision and impact of the analysis. Instead of just coloring things, it would be easy to make the mistake of thinking just color things as if it's a coloring book. You can even watch a movie while you're coloring. Not so. This is not a coloring book exercise. This is a sharp-eyed interrogation, critical interrogation of the reality of the world. When Sarah took her magnetic lasso to this evidence, she was interrogating. You can see the questioning. Look at what she's doing with windows. We haven't talked even before I read her 5 sentences. I know what she's speculating on. What is the relationship between the window patterns of the self-constructed residential fabric and the window patterns in this high design institutional building that dominates the foreground? And the other issues that are being interrogated through the careful and precise application of color with a high degree of transparency is, what is the connection? How do people move out of their self-constructed homes and communities through what has become the public realm of this community, and how is that connected to this facility? Is there a razor wire barrier with guards and surveillance cameras, or is it part of the free flow of the public realm? All of these things can be questioned and revealed through this analysis assignment, and that's what is happening here. The reason we insist on a high degree of transparency is that, and the reason we insist that you do not use opaque abstract shapes, arrows, circles, squares. Leave your polygon tools, the point-to-point lasso, leave that for your studio assertions of design ideas. This is an analysis. It's not a diagram of an idea. It is the speculative, tentative, hypothesizing exercise of trying to figure out what's going on. It's a questioning, and it's an invitation to your collaborators to help out, to, here's what I'm seeing here. Do you guys see it? Do you guys see it that way? Well, if you use a high degree of opacity, if it's too opaque, you're not asking us to participate. You're telling us this is the way it is, and there's no discussion. That's very 20th century. And here in the 21st century, we invite other people to collaborate with us. We say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Am I getting it right? Friends don't let friends get it wrong. Please verify for yourselves whether or not my interpretation holds water. And if it doesn't, please help me understand. Please correct it. So to invite people to verify your speculations, you have to give us access to both your overlay and the underlying evidence. If you are concealing the underlying evidence through a lack of transparency, we can't help you. We're done, right? It just sits there and on the screen and then goes away very quickly. But the transparency is allows us to have a conversation. Don't take my word for it. Look for yourself, and then please help me out if I seem to be getting it wrong. That is the responsibility of all producers of this interpretive evidence, because we got to get it right, and we're not going to get it right if you just say this is the truth. You have to invite us to figure it out with you. Hopefully that makes sense. We can talk more in class. A lot of people did that very well. This is the part, a lot of times in class I say, friends don't let friends spend too much time on this. When it comes to precisely capturing the edge, it's important to do it pixel for pixel. It's important that it appears that you flew to Medellin, you bought thousands of liters of paint, and you dumped the paint and painted the ground. And that the paint passes below trees, behind light poles, behind vehicles. We don't want this overlay of transparency floating between the camera and the reality. We want to paint the ground. It's probably not practical to fly down there and paint the ground, so instead we spend a little bit of extra time, actually sometimes significant extra time, to capture the reality of the situation pixel for pixel. And we cut out around the vehicles, around the light poles, around the buildings, around the tree canopies. It pays off in terms of retaining the sense of three-dimensional spatial experience on the ground plane. It's very important, and that's why we invest the time to do it. So that's it about precision and impact. The impact will increase. The more the precision, the greater the impact. and the more effective the analysis ultimately. If it's not in the image, it's hard to write about it, which brings us to the next thing. The relationship between the visual evidence and the 5 sentences, the logical sequence of points that are constructed directly out of the evidence. The winning example, the winning strategy for writing a proper sentence that translates what the architecture is doing and how from the visual evidence into words might be something, it follows the general structure of this thing that I'm showing you in the image does or produces, or some other strong verb, this architectural effect. This is what this specific feature of the architecture does and how it does it. So it might be that in this case, the floating of the mass over the sidewalk produces an inviting, sheltered entryway to draw people in directly into this public library space so that they feel welcome, invited, and that it's part of the street. So this architectural feature invites and sucks people right in to feel at home inside this new facility. Those are the types of sentences that work in this type of exercise, and you can switch the order, creatively to create something that works well. But the biggest challenge is when we get to the next step next week, when you are constructing a logical sequence where you talk about, first you start with the thing that's most obvious. In the midst of a self-constructed community of very limited means, we have what is clearly an expensive, high amenity value, just a very valuable piece of public infrastructure that is in stark contrast with the humble, self-constructed community. So that contrast is maybe the first thing that this image compels us to write in sentence 1. And then from there, we weave together a series of points that hopefully are interconnected, that it's a logical sequence of points. So we start with high value amenity in the center of a humble community, and it's not separated, it's linked. People are invited in through the form of the entry. And the generous windows looking out emulate, please don't use the word mimic, which is too close to mockery, that emulates the vocabulary, the formal vocabulary of the self-constructed community. And then you can talk about the relationship with the street grid shown in the light blue or purple, how the municipal infrastructure is reaching up from below, the valley below, and linking this community into the larger society of the valley of Medellin. And when you stack up 5 of these statements that come out of the visual evidence, hopefully at the very end, taken together, it brings us to a new place. It brings us to the place where it allows us to say something that prior to looking at this image, prior to constructing those 5 sentences, we never could have said it. And it might be something like, the investment to produce this building and link it to the rest of the valley offers this humble community a sense of dignity, a sense of value, and a sense of belonging to the larger society. that never would have existed without this physical presence. Boom. It's the sixth sentence you write. It is the claim that is born out of the 5 sentences that come before. You move that to the beginning in the next week's assignment. We can talk about that on Monday. The grading. So this is an exercise. The reason we do this exercise is this is a very useful thing to do when a group of people is trying to figure out how to solve a problem. We expect you to do this in studio. We expect you to do this when you get to the graduate program and the thesis. We expect you to do it in your meetings at work, during your careers. And it is something that will be very useful in 2040 when everyone in the room turns towards you and says, what should we do next? And so that's why we do it. We do it in this class. We're going to do it 12 times. We're going to do it during the 11 weeks of each topic, and we're going to do it again for the term project when it's worth real points. And so we set up the rubric and the grading to establish that continuity. It's 24 points eventually. Right now, we're only asking you to do the first 3 of the 6 things in the rubric. We're actually only the highest possible grade this week and next week is 12 points. So if you look in Blackboard, it should have changed by now. If you got 8 out of 12, 8 out of 24, you'll now see that it's not 8 out of 24, it's 8 out of 12. So that's the first adjustment. The second adjustment is just forget about percentages. We don't use the percentages. 8 out of 12 is not 67%. It is 2.67 because we're using the GPA 4-point scale. A is 4.0, C is 2.0. So 6 out of 12 is a C, 9 out of 12 is a B, 12 out of 12 is an A. So that's the scale. Forget about percentages. And so an 8 out of 12 is a B minus. Should you be happy? 8 was the average, which is pretty remarkable. Should you be happy with a B minus? No, don't be happy with a B minus. Get a little pissed off, read the assignment again, study the feedback offered, and when you can't figure out what it is I'm talking about in the feedback, you ask a friend, you ask me, and read the assignment again, and God damn it, I'm going to get a B next time, or a B plus, or an A minus. That's the appropriate attitude. But the way we do this course is we ask you to do it 12 times. The first time, and we don't, usually, this is the first time we've ever portioned it off 12 points, 16, 20. We're going to be moving in the direction of a full 24-point assignment. So the assignments later in the semester are worth more points than at the beginning of the semester. And you're doing the same assignment repeatedly. We expect you to figure it out. Those of you who figure it out quickly are going to be, we expect everyone to get close to a perfect score by the end. That's the goal. How many of you struggled to learn how to read? Well, look at you now. You know how to read. Everyone knows how to read. You are all going to be masters of this assignment. So we're not worried about that. We want you to master the assignment as quickly as possible and own it and make it better and make use of it and do brilliant design work because you have these skills. Many of you will figure this assignment out and you'll be getting A minus A scores very quickly, and you'll just be stacking up those high scores and you'll get an A in the course. Others, at the other end of the spectrum, some of you might do the assignment, not do the assignment. Some of you will do the assignment but turn it in late and lose points for that reason. Some of you will not read the instructions. You'll do a different assignment. You'll describe the project and then give us a picture of it, and you color it, and you'll be scoring very low points. You won't read the feedback. And at the very end of the semester, you'll ask if you can redo the assignments now that you've figured it out. No, you cannot redo the assignments. Just focus on the next assignment, please. And as quickly as possible, master this. And that's how, if you're stacking up low scores all the way through, it's really the only way you can do poorly in this course, is if you just ignore the instructions, ignore the feedback, ignore the discussions, turn things in late, don't turn things in at all. If you avoid those behaviors, you should do fine. Okay. So let's get into the content now that we're half hour into our time. The thesis here that I'm asking you to help me with is that the reason this architecture and urban form, urban design, urban planning, the reason it's so impactful and so effective is that it acknowledges that it's integrated with all aspects of life. This title, Designing for Life, is not arbitrary. It really has to do with, again, doing the opposite of what high design prided itself and aspired to in the 20th century, which was to produce beautiful, pristine objects that were just breathtaking and gorgeous, and surrounded by a buffer zone that protected it from the messiness and dirtiness of capitalism and life and death and human struggle, just to produce a museum or something else, a wealthy person's house, Villa Savoye, isolated from everything. And those are the conditions within which architecture thrives. Didn't work out so well. Let's remove the buffer zone. Let's remove the sanitary cordon around architecture. Let's tear down the barriers that protected architecture during the 20th century. And let's let life come flooding into architecture, and let architecture flood out into the world, spread out into the world of life. So we are designing for life. We're not designing for the museum or the wealthy person's house. We're not designing for the 1%. We're designing for life. Let's try the opposite of what we did. And so one of the things we're trying out here is that it's not just a beautiful object. It is a beautiful object. Look at that proposal by Cheryl Bratzos from 2009. It is a beautiful object, but it's not just a beautiful object. It actually acknowledges the struggles of people and invites them in, and catalyzes a system of support that actually shifts the outcomes. It actually, this is one of the insights that we've had very recently, I think 2 years ago, this idea of the project, the system, and the culture. That sometimes a project is so profound and so engaged in the actual reality of people's lives that it has an impact on larger systemic forces. That's the first linkage that we're looking at. And so this idea of the relationship between projects and systems leads us to aggressively pursue a systems thinking approach to design. So here we go. This first thing we're going to do is to look at how systems operate, and then speculate on how architecture, what can we learn about how architecture might operate within the context of larger systems, whatever that system might be, whether it's capitalism or just community life, how a community defines itself and struggles to help each other survive. So let's tear it down to the basics. We're going to look at what the word reflex means, because we're looking at system behaviors. and system behaviors that operate automatically in the background without any meetings or decisions. It just happens. It's baked into the system. Those are the behaviors that permeate through our environments and through our mentalities and our social relationships. And it's those automatic, unthinking things that we take for granted that operate in the background. These systems operate by reflex response. So when the doctor taps our knees, they're testing to see if our reflex responses are operating, whether the system response is healthy. It's a knee-jerk reflex. And so we become aware of these reflexive systems, and we look for the characteristic of reflexive systems in the world. Many systems that operate reflexively are the product of design. Back in the 20th century, when automobiles and internal combustion engines were part of automobiles and mechanical systems were part of automobiles, we had this thing called a governor. The faster the shaft spins, the wider the globes go out. It pulls the lever and it closes down the throttle. None of you work on engines, so maybe we'll move on to the reflexive feedback loops of market systems, that the laws of supply and demand. When someone spreads a rumor that they might be running out of toothpaste soon, everyone goes and buys toothpaste. So the demand increases, and so the price responds by going up. That's why toilet paper costs more than twice what it cost before COVID. And so there are these feedback loops. We diagram it as input, output, but it's not just input, output. There's a feedback loop. Think of your thermostat. The input is there's a temperature sensor. The input is is it a comfortable temperature? So we're about to have a heat wave this weekend. If you are lucky enough to have air conditioning, you set it to something like 74 or 78 if you care about the planet. And when the temperature inside goes hits 78, it turns on, there's a negative feedback loop, it turns on the blower and the HVAC system. And that operates until the temperature drops below the set point, and then there's a negative feedback loop that turns it off. That's the negative part of the negative feedback loop. These automatic systems are part of what drives human behavior. And it's useful to look at human behavior and try to account for human behavior according to these feedback loops. I'm going to change the order a little bit. I'm going to go to this.
Let's say Mr. Blue and Miss Red have each been arrested for some minor crime. The police think they committed a more serious crime, but they don't have enough evidence to convict.
This is the prisoner's dilemma.
Let's say Mr. Blue and Miss Red have each been arrested for some minor crime. The police think they committed a more serious crime, but they don't have enough evidence to convict them. They need a confession. They take them and put them in separate rooms so they can't talk, and play a little game. To try to force a confession, the police give them each a choice. Admit your partner committed the crime and you will go free. We'll pardon you for the minor crime, but your partner will have to spend 3 years in prison. If you stay silent and your partner lets us know that you were the one who really did it, then you're going to have to go away for 3 years. They know that the police don't have any evidence, and if they both stay silent, then they will only go to prison 1 year each for the minor crime. If they both betray each other, then they'll both go to prison for 2 years each. Okay, each partner can do one of two things: stay silent or betray. staying silent would be cooperating, and betraying would be defecting. If they both stay silent, then they each spend a year in prison. If one betrays and the other stays silent, then the betrayer goes free and the silent spends 3 years in prison. If they both betray, then it's 2 years each. So what are they going to do? Well, they should cooperate. That's the best option for the group, if we add the total number of years in prison. But let's take it from Red's perspective. If she thinks Blue is going to stay silent, then she should betray so she can go free. Going free is better than spending a year in prison. If she thinks he's going to betray her, then she should definitely betray. 2 years in jail is better than 3 and being made a fool of. Blue is in the exact same situation and will think the exact same thing. He should betray if she stays silent, and he should betray if she betrays. They should have both cooperated, but from an individual standpoint, they noticed they could always gain by defecting, if they have no control over what the other person's going to do. So they'll both defect to try to better their own situation, but come away not only hurting the group, but themselves. Individually, they're worse off than if they both cooperated. This situation is pretty made up, but it has some real-world analogs. A common example is with marketing. Let's say 2 cigarette companies, Red Strikes and Smooth Blue, are deciding how much money.
So this is The Prisoner's Dilemma, and it was made the focus of a game show in England.
Steel written inside. I will ask you in a moment to choose either the split or the steel. If you both choose the split ball, you will split today's jackpot of £40,015, and you will go home, each of you, with £20,007.50. If one of you chooses split and the other one chooses steel, whoever chooses the split ball goes home with nothing. But whoever chooses the steel ball goes home with the whole £40,015. Here's the rub. If you both choose the steel ball, you both go home
with nothing. Sorry, that got cut off. What do you think's going to happen? What would you do?
We have come such a long way together. I've brought you through, you brought me through, so we're both equals. 20,000, which is half, is more than I thought I would go away with today. So I am more than happy to split with you if I can trust you to do the same with me. I guaranteed you, I can shake on it now, I guaranteed you at the beginning of the game, if you took me through that round I would split, and I still intend to split with you.
What I'm going to say to you is, I had my cards read and I was told if I play fair, I will come away with a substantial amount of money. I'm going to look into your eyes when we're asked to make the decision, and I'm going to be truthfully honest with you. If I look into your eyes and I see that you're genuine and you're going to split that money with me, I promise you I will make the same decision with you. Can't be more straightforward and honest than that.
Do you trust them? What is their decision space? What are the pros and cons of choosing split versus choosing steel, given their context, given their individual decision space, what the pros and cons are for them? This is The Prisoner's Dilemma, translated into a game show and run week after week and with predictable outcomes.
Balls until next time. Goodbye.
When Tracy revealed the split ball, I can't really explain how I felt. I was just...
Look how happy he is.
Having lost over £20,000, I was speechless. I don't even know how to put it into words. It's a life-changing amount of money that I just had in my hands and lost within seconds of getting it.
At the end of the day,
he's the winner.
Your way to £40,000, you deserve.
Because he successfully lied. So he's the winner. What are the people in the audience clapping for? What are they cheering? They're cheering the fact that this guy lied. He convinced this other contestant of one thing, and then he did the other thing. He's the winner.
Abraham, I want you to trust me.
And so what happens if someone really understands how the game is played, and what does it take to produce a positive outcome? Let's see what this guy does. This guy is a stockbroker. He understands game theory. He understands how the larger system of trading stocks and bonds operates in the world of finance, and he knows what it takes to game the system.
Abraham, I want you to trust me. 100% I'm going to pick the steel ball.
Sorry, you're going to...
I'm going to choose the steel ball.
You're going to take the
I
steel?
want you to do split, and I promise you that I will split the money with you.
Well, after you took the steel?
Yeah.
You're going to take steel?
Yeah.
I'm going to take split?
Yeah.
So you take the money?
And I will split it with you.
After the show?
Yeah. Abraham, I promise you I'll do that. If you do steel, we both walk away with nothing. I'm telling you 100% I'm going to do it.
I appreciate that. Right, I'll give you another alternative. Why don't we just both pick split?
I'm not going to pick split. I'm going to steal. Abraham, honestly, 100% I'm going to steal.
It's in your nature to steal.
No, I'm honest, and I'm going to tell you...
You're an honest man.
I am. That's why I'm telling you I'm going to steal. If you do split, then I will split the money.
I can't see myself doing that.
Okay, well, I'm going to steal, so we're going to leave with nothing.
Where's your brains coming from? I can't work
He's
out.
panicking. The game
I
show
know
host
that I'm a
is
decent
witnessing
guy, and I
the
will split money
end
with
of
you.
his game,
No, we should
his
just
end of
both
his
stick-
career.
No, I'm going to do steal.
There is no legal
No, I know
requirement
there is. I know there
for
is.
him to give you the money.
Of course. If I gave you my word, now let me tell you what my word means.
Okay.
My father once said to me, a man who doesn't keep his word is not a man. He's not worth nothing.
The prepared speech.
Not worth $1.
I agree.
So,
Abraham, I'm going to steal. So you've got the choice. You either steal, and we both walk away with nothing. Because you know, I've told you my intention, and I've told you that I will split the money with you, Abraham.
if I gave you my word that I was going to split, I would split. And you're going to take steel.
So what do you think happens? This game show host is now trying to figure out what his career options are after the collapse of this game.
It's a tough one.
We've lost it. We've lost everything.
Okay. Lost then.
We're walking away with no money because you're an idiot.
No, that's
You're
not
an
true.
idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are.
Split or steal? Yes, congratulations.
What?
You've both split and each received £6,800.
Always good. So he figured out the decision space, and he had to manipulate the system in order to produce a positive outcome. It's the only way you could produce a positive outcome within the constraints of the prisoner's dilemma. And I present this, we just spent a lot of time looking at this. I present this with a question. Given this insight, is it possible to produce positive outcomes even when the system is rigged against positive outcomes? And in order to really take into consideration what this condition is, let's look at how the system is rigged against positive outcomes by looking at the Anthropocene in the sense of game theory. A lot of people have put forward the hypothesis that the reason the world is in such bad shape is because of the rules of the game, specifically the rules of capitalism. I'm going to pause here. Pause, share, stop recording. So in class, we do an exercise where we talk about roommates and the shared kitchen, and we ask how many of you have had a roommate who just piled their dishes in the sink and ate other people's food in the refrigerator and just was not responsible. And we look at the prospect we look at the kitchen of the shared home experience as the common pool resource. Some players, some participants, some beneficiaries of the common pool resource are responsible actors, like you clean up after yourself, you put the dishes in the dishwasher, you don't pile them in the sink. And other actors are not responsible or less responsible. And in the year 2040, do you want Jada to be the president of ExxonMobil, or should you be the president of ExxonMobil? And in the analogy here, the most significant common pool resource in the world is the petroleum reserves. If ExxonMobil is the largest multinational corporation with the greatest holdings of the common pool resource of petroleum, that has the biggest single impact on the fate of the species and all species and the planet, then you don't want Jada to be, sorry Jada, you don't want Jada, she can't even keep the sink clear. She can't take care of this very small common pool resource. You don't want Jada to be the president of ExxonMobil. You want someone who's responsible to be the president of ExxonMobil. And so we look at that, and the responsible person becomes the president of ExxonMobil, and yet still they can't do the right thing. The right thing would be keep the oil in the ground, shift the investments towards renewable resources, cooperate with governments who are trying to control the increase of greenhouse gases, to control the rise in temperature, limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're quickly shooting past that. It takes dramatic action by people like the president of ExxonMobil. So you'd think a responsible person, they took care of the sink when the common pool resource was the kitchen. Hopefully that behavior would extend to the common pool resource at a larger scale, like the petroleum reserves of the planet. But unlike when you had the kitchen sink, where there was a social incentive, you are rewarded or punished according to how responsibly you behave in terms of taking care of your own mess in the kitchen sink, the opposite is true at the level of ExxonMobil. The second that you step into the shoes of president of ExxonMobil and you hint at the possibility that you want to keep the petroleum reserves in the ground, what happens? All of the shareholders, all of the board members, global markets, Dutch Royal Shell, they say, thank you very much, we'll take your market share. You will create a shortage and the prices will go up, the price of oil will go up, the profits of the oil companies will go up. Thank you so much. And as quickly as possible, you will be removed from your position as president of ExxonMobil. The rules of the game, as we saw here in the prisoner's dilemma and the Golden Ball game show, the rules of the system almost guarantee that the outcome will be lies, deception, stealing, and the worst possible outcome for all participants. And this is the prisoner's dilemma is commonly extended, this game theory is extended to the tragedy of the commons. Now, keep in mind that a crucial characteristic of prisoner's dilemma is the two prisoners are not allowed to talk privately. And that condition is extended to the tragedy of the commons and what I'm about to show you. And that is the question. Are the participants allowed to talk to each other? Let's look. This is the Commons at the center of New England towns. We built a church. In front of the church, there's a large green area, and the first houses are built around the common green, and the farmland extends out behind the houses. And we use the common green. It's the kitchen sink. We have a shared kitchen sink. This is where we graze our livestock. If we each put on 3 sheep, we're all good. The carrying capacity of the commons is not surpassed. But I'm greedy and I want to maximize my profits. I've got to make money to pay the tuition for my kids to go to college. So I'm going to put a 4th sheep on. What happens?
And it can only hold this many animals. This is the carrying capacity. If animals are added beyond this, the grass can't regrow fast enough to support them all. Also, the grass protects the soil from erosion. If too many animals are around, the field may decline in productivity, lowering the carrying capacity. The animals will be less healthy and provide lesser quality products, lowering the profit each animal provides. So it's in this group's best interest to keep the number of animals on the field at or below the carrying capacity. But every herdsman that puts an animal on the field will get the direct benefit that animal provides for them, but they would only share a portion of the cost of the degraded field. If the field were at carrying capacity and a herdsman decides to add an extra animal, the added animal takes some of the food that would have gone to the others. This reduces their value. The owner of that additional animal comes out ahead because even though all his animals are a little bit less healthy, he has more of them. But each herdsman acts under these incentives and will keep adding animals to their herd or let their animals graze longer, so long as it's profitable to themselves. But really, they're all losing out, kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. Contrast this to a situation where only one person owns it. If they add an extra animal, they're only hurting themselves, so they don't do it. Since new people can't be excluded from the field, there's almost no point in boycotting the use because someone else could just come in. None of the herdsmen own the field, and they can see that the field may not be around forever. They see no point in conservation and just try to use it before someone else does.
Get it? So this is often characterized, the prisoner's dilemma extended to the tragedy of the commons, where the 3 herdsmen are not talking to each other. There are no social forces involved. There's only the economic incentive. The pursuit of your own self-interest results in classical economics, it results in the greatest good for everybody. But in this case, it doesn't. This is called a market failure. And it's a market failure occurs when the feedback loops of market forces do not take into consideration the balance of bads and disservices with goods and services. And so these externalities, they are external to the functional linkages of the market system. And so when we identify externalities that are that result in market failures, Adam Smith said, well, until you have internalized, until markets operate with perfect information and lots of actors who have free choices, until those conditions are achieved in the ideal operation of free market capitalism, you're going to have some guardrails. You're going to have some actors acting to establish a framework within which markets can operate well and successfully, designed by, this is the role of government, that you take these externalities and you create mechanisms to move those externalities into the market system such that you prevent market failures. One market failure is the death of the planet, and specifically plastic. Plastic is a market failure. The costs of the environmental costs of producing the plastics and the environmental cost of dumping the plastics after their very short useful life compared to their material life is an externality, it has negative consequences, and if there were a way to move those external impacts into the market system, surely we would. Well, we can. Many countries have done it. It's simply, Germany says any packaging that you buy from a store can be returned to the store where it was first given to you. And so they have, by making that rule, they have eliminated that externality and brought the cost of producing and disposing of the packaging, they've brought it into the economic equation of everyday market relationships. Khan Academy has this economics unit where they run through this exercise. How much would you need to charge for a plastic bag to significantly reduce its use? And there's an equation that's, introduction to economics. It's an easy equation. It's not rocket science. It's not even unknown. It's widely known. If you charge 2 cents per bag, it returns the curve of supply and demand to a balance point, and change the rules of the game. Without these types of rules, without these adjustments to the rules of the game are whoever pollutes and depletes the most gets the most money. So if you're the president of ExxonMobil or fill in the blank, any commercial operation, the rules of the game, we might as well have a game show in the UK that operates this if we wanted to see it in starker terms. If you get 5 people at a starting line, you say, whoever extracts the most out of the planet and dumps the most garbage into the atmosphere, the oceans, and the landscape gets the most money. Any questions? On your mark, get set, go. That is the game that we are playing. The outcomes should not be a surprise to anyone. It should also not be a surprise that the more we learn, the more frustrating it is to see these outcomes. It is unlike, sorry, Jared Diamond, knowledge is insufficient. Unless that knowledge results in a shifting of the rules of the game, there is not likely to be any significant change in the outcomes. And so we are playing this game on a global scale. The gamification of the survival of the planet is what we're going to look at next. Scientists have identified 9 realms with the greatest probability of having a role in the deterioration of the planetary system. And so we look at these 9 realms in the pre-industrial period. A lot of these things just didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of these things we didn't have information on. So we zoom forward to 1950. We still don't have information on everything. Some of these things still don't exist. But in 1950 is the dawn of the Great Acceleration, which is the key turning point in the geological, the pinpointing of the start of the Anthropocene. And what we do know is that the expansion of the footprint of the human species has led already by 1950 an extreme limitation of habitat for species, non-human species. And so we already see a dramatic threat level to species survival already in 1950. Other things are starting to show up, We're starting to see ozone depletion, a little bit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and watch what happens when we move from 1950 to 1970. Not much changed. 1970, we're still we're still within the safe operating space on most things other than biosphere integrity. But then what happens when we go to 1990? All of a sudden, the increased use of air conditioning in the tropics, in the developing world, and more air conditioning and the use of aerosols. This other thing, ozone depletion, goes through the roof. And those of us with chronic terminal melanin deficiency disorder, also known as white people, are at high risk of premature skin cancer because of the loss of the protective layer of the ozone. So exactly what you would expect did happen. Responsible governments around the world got into a room led by the United States and said, let's agree to cap and curtail and reduce the use of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, the key ingredients to all heating and air conditioning systems using heat pumps, also for aerosol propellants. And we did it. The governments agreed. It was a clear example of what governments can do when they act responsibly and they take their collective fates into consideration. The chlorofluorocarbons were replaced with hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which apparently don't have a significant impact on the ozone layer. And over the last 30 years, we have seen a restoration of the ozone layer. And so here we are in 2015, I believe this data is from, and we did it. Congratulations. We created economic forces that took this externality, the ozone layer, and we brought it in. The clearer example is when it comes to ocean acidification and acid rain. We noticed acid rain in the United States, the product of sulfur coming out of smokestacks, and we developed an idea of cap and trade. We capped the amount of sulfur that any smokestack was allowed to emit, and we granted credits to every smokestack owner. We said, you can emit your current level of sulfur next year, and we give you credits for that. But the following year, we're gonna bring that level down, and we're gonna allow you to trade your credits on an auction basis to the highest bidder. All of a sudden, there is a market for sulfur credits, and because there's a market for sulfur credits, if you own a sulfur spewing smokestack and your financial advisors tell you that we think that each credit is going to be worth so amount of money 2 years from now, you can use that potential income from auctioning off your sulfur credits to finance the installation of scrubbers now. And companies that did that turned out that they made a fortune. They made money by borrowing money against the value of those future sulfur credits. They borrowed money, they installed the scrubbers, reduced their sulfur release from the smokestack, and that allowed them to sell their sulfur credits to the highest bidder, and they made a fortune. This system of cap and trade was an example of harnessing market forces. Basically, instead of rewarding people for doing bad things, for leaving their dishes in the sink or for polluting the world as quickly as possible, it was a market mechanism to reward good behavior, to reduce your sulfur. Whoever stopped spewing sulfur the fastest got the most money. So that was a change in the rules. And so it makes sense that we would do the same thing with carbon, right? So in 1989, we repeated the exercise. We got everyone into the room around the world, and we were very close to signing a cap and trade limitation, basically the same system for carbon. And at the very last second, the former governor of New Hampshire, John Sununu, got together with George Herbert Walker Bush and said, I think we can avoid this. And Bush said, let's avoid it. And so Sununu collaborated with China and the Soviet Union, now called Russia, to undermine and to sabotage the agreement. They did it. Sorry about that. I was voting at that time, so I have to apologize. Your parents owe you an apology. They were voting at the time too. I didn't vote for Bush, but still I was around. And we have since then emitted more carbon. Since 1989, we have emitted more carbon into the atmosphere since 1989, that moment of truth, than all of human history prior to that. So we can look at these things as systems. We can model it as systems. We can visualize it. This is one of the power of what we do as architects. Instead of just throwing numbers around, we now have data visualization, where we actually spatialize it or make it a two-dimensional reality. And we give people a feeling in their bodies, in their bones, in their guts. What are we talking about here? How big are these things? And Bruce Mau's book, Massive Change, was a major revelation of what design can do to bring people into touch with the reality of these system behaviors on a planetary scale. Rem Koolhaas's firm, Office of Metropolitan Architecture, has spun off lots of other firms. The one we're interested here is Moss, I can't remember VR, DeFries, anyway, MVRDV. This firm has taken the data visualization and data spatialization brought it into its practice and has performed some remarkable data visualizations for us to engage in a very clear understanding and getting in touch with the reality of the larger systems of the planet and what it looks like. We don't have time to go into all the details, but where it's currently at, and they've, instead of simply giving these static reports, they have moved from publishing books to producing games, to gamify the performance of large systems. And so basically they create video game drivers to test different scenarios. And as soon as you change one, you can change one factor and you can look at what the outcome is. But as soon as you start changing 2, 3, 4 factors at a time, you need a computer, and a book doesn't work. So we do video games. And so they have produced...
What if we could simulate our planet? How can you lead the world to a better tomorrow with the decisions you make today? Planet Maker 2 allows you to test your policy decisions and see them change the future of our planet. You can distribute the wealth, open or close borders, make everyone a vegan, green the deserts, or develop a hyperloop network. Planet Maker provides you with a platform to test out unlimited future scenarios. Seeing both sides of the planet allows you to see the whole world status at all times. Planet Maker includes an equally powerful urban visualization tool so that you can not only see your decisions impact the global scale, but also define the urban. Planet Maker 2 represents a revolutionary way to simulate our planet's future, where we have to maximize our ecocentric thinking while maintaining our egocentric way of living.
So it's basically Grasshopper applied to the architectural model of the planet as a planetary system. It would be interesting to see what some of you might produce if you bring your speculations into this platform. And even more so, instead of looking at the entire planet, looking at local conditions. And at some point, if you focus in on a fragment of a city, you start to get in touch with the dialogue that we are engaging in through this course, through our analysis work. So that's the big framing of systems thinking, game theory, system behavior in relationship to architecture. Well, let's look at the architecture part. One of the hypotheses that is developed through the Designing for Life research that we've been working on since 2007 here at Wentworth is leads us back to Barcelona in 1992. It leads to a few different points of origin. One point of origin that we're considering here is Barcelona, especially Barcelona in preparation for the 1992 Olympics. Barcelona, as wonderful as it is now, it was far less wonderful in the early 1990s and the 1980s. It took the concerted work of a consortium of academics, urban designers, urban planners, to start with an in-depth analysis of the fabrics of Barcelona. And the reason we are interested in Barcelona is because of the tools they used. They did not do what we do here in the United States, which is to split our views of urban environments into architecture of the building and the planning policy of the government. And anything in between, it's whatever the transportation, basically the road engineers, it's whatever the road engineers feel like imposing on us. This is an unfair characterization, but it's a useful reference point. In other parts of the world, they have not yet split their view of cities into architecture at one scale, public policy at a different scale, and really no one from a design perspective caring for and attending to the needs of the urban fabric and the urban design considerations. And so we look at Barcelona in 1992 as using the tools, the powerful tools of architecture, but informed by these larger considerations of housing, economic development, mobility, etc. And so by applying these graphic tools of architectural analysis to figure ground drawings, the Noli map, these holistic representations, it gives us access to the interplay between these different forces. And we isolate those forces in these diagrammatic treatments, and then we compile them together to get a comprehensive understanding of what is going on, how things are operating, and use that as a platform for speculating on what changes might actually improve the outcomes for the largest number of people. And so using these tools, the city of Barcelona went through a rapid transformation where the locations with the greatest impact, with the greatest potential for impact, were identified, and investment of money, time, design talent was made and it was very, very successful. And so that's one of the key reference points. One of the things the current research that we're engaging in is looking at is how has the design community efforts around Barcelona in 1992, the lessons of that transformation, how have those lessons been embraced, codified, established as a set of principles, and then distributed out into the larger world. Specifically in Latin America. Another point of origin is the architect Jaime Lerner of Curitiba, Brazil. Jaime Lerner graduated from architecture school somewhere around 1965. Very shortly after graduating, he was part of a team that entered a design competition for a master plan for the city of Curitiba. His team lost the competition, but the momentum of producing that plan and their confidence that these were the right things to do led Jaime Lerner to run for mayor. And even though he entered the race a few short weeks before the election, he won. And then he implemented it. And part of that master plan that he came up with, he and his team came up with, was the bus rapid transit. They redesigned the bus. They redesigned the bus stop. And they invented a new system that outperformed any bus system. It matched the performance of light rail or heavy rail, a metro system like the T. It matched it for 1/10 of the cost of light rail, something like 1/100th the cost of heavy rail. And now every city in the world, including Boston, either has a bus rapid transit system invented, designed by Jaime Lerner and his team, an architect, or they're preparing plans for implementing one. It's the biggest revolution in urban mobility since the tram car.
By the 1970s, the population of Curitiba had grown nearly tenfold in 50 years and was clogged with cars. Lerner knew the solution was in public transport, but how to make it work in a cash-poor city?
If I could tell what is the secret of Curitiba. So one is it's a kind of commitment with simplicity. We didn't have fear of simplicity because the city is not so complex that the complexity sellers want us to understand.
So Lerner created main arterial traffic paths, each with 3 roads, one leading into the city, one out, and a central road with 2-way traffic and dedicated bus-only lanes to speed passengers in and out of the centre.
We started with 25,000 passengers a day. Now we're transporting more than 2 million passengers. And it's one of the few systems in the world which is not subsidized. It pays by itself.
Lerner introduced triple articulated buses to carry more passengers.
We can transport in this simple system more passengers than in a subway. The cost 100 times or 200 times less expensive than a subway. And we can do it, we can implement the system in less than 2 years.
Isso faz falta. Ponderação e eficiência.
Obrigado. Olha, é bom ouvir isso.
Thinking about his buses one day, Lerner realised they were slowed by boarding time, with people buying tickets on the bus. He came up with a design which was the final touch to his revolutionary bus system, the glass boarding tubes.
I remember when I designed first time the boarding tube in a serviette, in a napkin, in a plane. And when I saw it, and it works, it's a dream.
Now during peak hour, buses arrive every 60 seconds, and they're always full.
So the innovations of the bus rapid transit system, along with lots of other things, were very important in Curitiba. He instituted a plan where if you bring in a kilogram of garbage and recyclables, you get a kilogram of fresh produce. And that garbage for food exchange system resulted in food security for the underprivileged population of Curitiba, of which was significant, and cleaned up the city at the same time. And so these lessons were repeated in other cities throughout the world and throughout Latin America. We saw dramatic transformation of Bogota, Colombia. It's worthy of an entire segment of the lecture itself, but we don't have time for that. Let's move on to Medellin, Colombia. We went through this at the end of History Theory 2. I presented this material in the spring of 21 for you guys. I've put a recording of that lecture in Brightspace in week 11, just to remind you, just in case you cannot find your notes, and apparently you cannot find your notes from that lecture. Watch it again. I don't have time to go into all this detail. But suffice it to say that the most dangerous cities in the world today are Los Cabos and Caracas. And as dangerous as they are, don't go there. As dangerous as they are, they are about 1/4 as dangerous as Medellin, Colombia was in 1993. The highest murder rate in human history and recorded history that year. Long story short, the success in pushing back the drug cartels, pushing them out of cities and then pushing them out of business to a large extent in Colombia around the year 2004 resulted in a dramatic relocation of drug warriors out of the jungles and back into Medellin. I wrote about this in the reading, so I won't go into it. What's the game theory perspective on this? Sergio Fajardo running for mayor of Medellin. He presents a prospect. All the other candidates were traveling in armored vehicles with bodyguards when they visit the neighborhoods. Fajardo said, I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to fear. If you want to kill me, go ahead, kill me. I'm going to walk to different parts of town, and I'm going to go to the most impoverished parts of town, and I'm going to do so without bodyguards. And Manuel and I met him in Harvard Square. He was wearing blue jeans then. He's famous for wearing blue jeans wherever he goes. So he also said, I'm going to stop the theft of money, the corruption. Where did Fajardo's money come from? The city of Medellin owns a reservoir and a hydroelectric power infrastructure, really unbelievable. It's like Niagara Falls, this reservoir very high up in the Andes that drives all these turbines, produces a surplus of electrical power very cheaply, and Medellin, the city of Medellin, owns this utility, and they sell electrical power all over Latin America, across national borders, and it results in a huge amount of income. It has always resulted in a huge amount of income. That income was routinely pocketed by the wealthiest and most corrupt participants in the corruption system. He said, not one penny. And that's where he got the money to produce his library parks. The other aspect of this is the metro system was established by his predecessors, and the wealthier neighborhoods wanted access to the metro system, so there was a plan for cable cars, like they do in Barcelona, to connect people to the metro system. But it was to connect the wealthiest neighborhoods to the metro system, because we don't even recognize the informal settlements. Fajardo flipped that on its head. He was elected, and part of his campaign was, listen, wealthy 1% population of Medellin, we've had our glorious run. We've had our corruption. We've had our high lifestyle. And look where it's gotten us. We're at risk of returning to becoming the murder capital of the world, with everyone returning back. We need to produce a new approach. We need to make a deal with these drug warriors coming back to town. We need to make a deal with the most impoverished corners of the valley. And that only by doing the opposite of what we've been doing. He didn't say this exactly. You can recognize this approach, this mentality. Only by doing the opposite of what we have been doing can we expect a different outcome. And so he took that cable car, and he and his team, they put a pin in the map every time there was a body discovered. And then they stand back and look where the densest cloud of pins is, and that's where they act. And so they acted at Santo Domingo, where Pablo Escobar's army was in the habit of piling the bodies. No one wanted to live there. No one was displaced in the production of the first library park, the King of Spain Library Park, connected to the rest of the city with the cable car system down to the metro system.
Those plastic bottles that are trees growing is the idea that once someone dies, instead of taking revenge, you plant a tree. These are all people who have been killed through the fighting. 3 different groups were fighting for control of the place, and basically it's just mercenaries and like teenagers killing each other. The idea is not to dwell on the past and enact revenge, but to plant a tree in order to hope for the future.
So this guy with the camera, one of the questions that I asked Fajardo when he came to Wentworth in 2009 or 2008, 2009, I asked him what makes this different than a top-down project. If you look at this, it looks like the government hired a bunch of architects, and the architects looks like he hired a bunch of architects, and the architects designed something and just plopped it down. And how is this different than a top-down mega project imposition on a community that had no say in it and don't know what hit them? And his answer was, we engaged the community as a client. They sent in an army of these young men, like the guy with the on the camera we just saw, and they had meetings multiple times a week. They had meetings with children. They had meetings with the parents. They asked the children to draw their ideal library, their ideal park, and they gave that to the architects. And they, even after Manzati won this competition, they sat Manzati down in the midst of the people who live in this community And the people demanded that he change the design, and he changed the design. So hundreds, thousands of meetings, hundreds, thousands of architects and social workers engaging these communities, relentlessly asking them what they wanted until they reached a point, a turning point, where the community actually trusted the architects, that they were interested in what they needed, what they wanted in the point of view of the people. It hasn't been implemented perfectly. To get these answers, what I had to do is get a sabbatical, get a grant, rent out my house, move my family to Medellin, and we lived there. And I spent a lot of time walking around talking to people, and this is the results of that research. This is what it took. Did that. This is Comuna 13, formerly the most dangerous area. I took drone shots, but these drone shots are much better than mine. But the people said, we want connectivity, we want a path up and down the hill so we can be connected to the rest of the city. And at each landing, you see these new buildings. There is a facility for school kids and programs and public engagements. Fajardo came to the United States. He came at the invitation of Wentworth, gave a remarkable keynote presentation in Watson Hall. We went there and had these incredible tours where the neighborhood kids, the parents of these kids, had to, when they were doing their homework, they had to do their homework under the bed with flashlights to avoid the bullets that were flying through their thin walls of their informal settlement. And now their children, after school, can go play video games in the library and develop information age skills that set them in a totally different place.
In the year 2004, we got into power. We were a group of people coming from different sectors of society who have created a civic independent movement. And we have perfectly clear what we wanted to do once in power, to fight the social inequalities and the violence that we have had in our city. And we knew the formula, the recipe, in order to face those challenges. Decrease violence, and whenever we decrease violence, then we came up with the social opportunities. Those social opportunities were centered about education. How education, understood in a broad sense, which meant education, science, technology, development of productive activities, culture, all those things together should be the way we should go in order to become a better, much better society.
How do we translate this political formulation, the recipe, the formula? Is this translatable into game theory? Is he presenting it as game theory? This is a mathematician. He's a PhD mathematician. I think it's game theory. What do you think?
Han venido niños de 5 años, de 6, de 7, que no sabían manejar computadores y aquí han aprendido a manejarlos, a manejar el mouse. Para ellos ha sido todo un reto y un sueño tener contacto con esos computadores. Entonces es una labor muy bella que hacen las bibliotecas, de tener esa oportunidad de una inclusión social, en que aquí no hay diferencia ni de razas, ni de edades, ni de géneros, y todo el mundo tiene oportunidad a la educación.
It's what the architecture does.
This is Jose Darío Gallego. He was blinded in a car accident more than 30 years ago, and only recently he dared to face a computer. Because in the Library Park Belén, they encouraged him to take the course, in spite of his handicapped condition.
Yo digo que uno de los aciertos grandes fue convertir estos lugares que antes eran de represión, porque aquí estaba el F2, haberlo hoy en día convertido en un lugar de ilustración para el niño, para el joven, para el adulto, para el limitado sensorial, para el...
Medellín, todos saben, viene de épocas duras, de épocas de violencia, y está transitando un camino de superación en el cual la inclusión de los más pobres es una de las estrategias fundamentales. Sabemos que el desarrollo es verdaderamente importante si incluye a los más humildes, y sabemos que en el tiempo actual los más humildes podrán estar realmente incluidos si cerramos la brecha digital.
So a game theory approach is to, instead of giving the greatest services to the already well off, you give the greatest services to those who would otherwise be incentivized to behave badly. And here we're not talking about ExxonMobil, we're talking about the returning 20-something, 30-something year old young men who left when they were in the 4th grade, left school and went to go fight in the drug wars. That's the game theory analysis. So you offer the greatest architectural quality, and not just the architecture, it's the social services. The architecture is not what's saving the society. It's at the same time, these social services, these opportunities do not work unless they are delivered in something that grants dignity to the population that it's targeting. So it's a crucial element that on its own cannot do what it does. It is a powerful vehicle for transformative social, educational, economic opportunities for the target population, which are the most historically oppressed and underprivileged population of the society. Things were so bad in Medellin, Colombia, that they were willing to do whatever it takes, even devoting resources to the poorest people of the society. That's how desperate they were. The groups, and this is not just a park, it's not just a library, it's not just a good library in a good park. There are no programmatic words that cover this. This is one of the problems of architectural program. Instead of thinking in terms of program, we should think in terms of activities and intensity of activities. Single-use programming is the enemy of effective architectural activation. And so you flood these architectural spaces, these framed spaces, with as many different activities as you can that can possibly cohabitate and thrive in their presence. These mailboxes are all of the individual social groupings of the community, and the library is a hub of the meetings that take place because they said we want rooms that we can meet in. It wasn't just the 5 library parks with Fajardo and then 5 more with Salazar and then 5 more and 5 more. It's not just the 20 library parks. It's also the dozens of school renovations, the dozens of new schools, the colegio, and the hundreds of school renovations that occur starting with the least privileged communities of Medellin. The Museum of Science, Parque Explora, down in the valley, but right on the metro line, is a very strong attractor, a magnet, and one of the best library parks, La Quintana, my favorite. And the connection, it's hard to see from this perspective, the one that's commonly photographed. It's hard to tell over to the left the degree of connection between the community and the library park. But over here you can see it. There's a street here, and then this is basically the courtyard of the community. If we move around here and take a photo from the top of this street, this is what it looks like. It's directly connected. The street runs down, the staircase runs up. This is connected. There's no razor wire. There's no barrier. There's no security guard. It changes everything when you look at the architecture of connection, the formal, spatial, institutional relationship between a building and its context. Finally, the ideas of designing for life that were developed in Barcelona, in Curitiba, in Bogota, in Medellin, were all brought together in this remarkable competition entry in the year 2012, when Manuel Delgado and Jorge Perez and Opus, Jorge Perez and Opus are at the heart of the transformation of Medellin, working with first Mayor Sergio Fajardo and second Mayor Alonso Salazar specifically. They were participants in Wentworth's Designing for Life 2008, and they joined forces, Manuel, Jorge, and Opus joined forces to develop a proposal for one of the largest urban redevelopment plans in the Western Hemisphere at the center of Caracas, Venezuela, on a former military air base. And their entry is founded on principles that make it worthy of close study and has been closely studied multiple times and formulated in these 4 interrelated strategies for urban development between environmental balance, urban dynamics, including all of these social, political, economic, and mobility challenges, public and private mixed-use development. This is to boost the intensity of activity and especially the social engagement of the public realm, activating the public realm like we see in the library parks of Medellin. So with this formulation, they analyzed the situation, the history, and proposed weaving together these corridors, not just kind of basically to when Manuel talks about it, you hear him talking about the principles of the emerald necklace as we experience here in Boston. Basically, the weaving together of multiple green corridors of recreational space together, connecting this amazing mountain that dominates the valley of Caracas and integrating across that valley, connecting all of the public open spaces, including its newest and most glorious public open space when La Carlota Park is actually constructed. And the design of the park is very much informed by the dynamics of water management. And so this is a crucial aspect. Then to consider public infrastructure and the use of mass transit, and public transit, and controlling automobile growth, and using the central location of this site to weave it all together so it is greater than the sum of its parts. Then to mobilize the development potential of a former industrial area adjacent to the park and other areas that were dominated by military uses, and to really integrate these things. So instead of being a large barrier in the center of the valley, it becomes a hub where all of the edges are activated and interconnected across this green space. And finally, to consider it a place of activating social and empowering social gathering from the vacuum, the void that it is now, into a central place, integrating the wonderful world-famous Parc del Este adjacent to it. And so the principles of this winning design, as wonderful as this winning design is, Manuel and his team lamented the loss of so many other ideas. And so we decided to have Designing for Life 2 in 2013, where the competitors, not just the winning competition entry, but all of the other competition entries with ideas worthy of considering as we move forward, were brought in to present to each other, including our own Ignacio Cardona, came to the United States for the first time in 2013 to present his team's competition entry, and so many other wonderful collaborators from Caracas who have benefited our students over this long relationship. And just a quick peek at some of the student projects that came out of our multiple Caracas studios, just to indicate how important it is for us to embrace the lessons of what architecture can and should do in places like Caracas as the entire world becomes more and more afflicted by some of the same severe challenges as we see in Caracas.